Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jody Dixon, and I am the Assistant Director of International Education at the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. I want to be cognizant of your time, and so whereas we'll allow people to join when they feel comfortable or they're finished their lunches, I want to ensure that we have enough time today to kind of enjoy each other's company. I want to say thank you all for joining us during what I know is a busy week for us, especially if you are in the world of international education specifically. And so I want to thank our speaker today, Dr. Mary Price, especially for joining my colleague, Kathy Copeland from ASKU's American Democracy Project. Today, this particular session will allow us to kind of really dive into some vital intersections of civic and global learning in the context of education abroad. As educators and practitioners in the field of IE, we know, even if you're not in the field of IE, we know the transformative potential of global learning opportunities, whether through its education abroad, virtual exchanges, or international student programs. These experiences really challenge our students to engage with some of the most pressing issues of our time, including polarization, inequity, marginalization, climate change, and authoritarianism. Now, I'd ask you, the work that I get to do is largely in developing partnerships and academic exchanges for both our faculty and or the students that our faculty and administrators serve. If you're not familiar with ASKU, we represent regional public comprehensive universities, a sector which has about 500 institutions. Many of you might be joining as representatives of those institutions. And today I have Kathy with me, who will talk briefly about her work at ASKU as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And thanks again for having me here. I just want to introduce myself. I'm the I'm the director of ASKU's American Democracy Project. So what we do is we focus within the civic and global engagement sector. I'm grateful to work with Jody and Sufei, my colleagues there. But what we really focus on within ADP, or the American Democracy Project, is building, strengthening, and assessing an institution's civic engagement footprint. So we want to help develop globally engaged citizens, and we do this on a number of different levels by integrating critical thinking skills, deliberative dialogue, listening skills, democracy building into everyday conversations. Two of the programs that we offer that may be of interest to you in the future are stewardship of public lands, where we look into how sustainability and climate change could be integrated onto campuses, but we do this through an experiential learning opportunity at Glacier National Park, which is a fun time, but also just so meaningful. And we really are able to gather a lot of information that goes into a larger compendium to share with campuses about how to integrate sustainability and the sustainability development goals across your campus. And then a different avenue is democracy conversations. You can see the link there into the chat there, but we'll have 4 different conversations over the next spring semester with everything from prison reform to building campus gardens. And you may find it interesting to join and to bring your own voice to it. A lot of the work that we are doing in February is assessing how voter engagement went, and that was a lot of the work that we did in 2024. So excited to share some of those opportunities. But thank you so much for bringing democracy into this conversation, Jody, and I'm so enthusiastic to hear from Mary. So I'll turn it back to you, Jody.
Thank you, Kathy. Now, there's a lot that's happened over the last few days, and we know that on your campuses that you're not just dealing with domestic student challenges, but the fact that you yourselves or your students are navigating these global challenges, it's not difficult. It's not without its difficulties as a faculty member or an administrator. Many students respond to some of their experiences in education abroad in ways that can unintentionally perpetuate factionalism, while others may just feel very overwhelmed or isolated. You know, this might even be your international students that might currently be on your campuses. And that's where we together today as global educators and everyday play a crucial role. How can we help students reflect critically on their civic identity and habits while fostering inclusion, understanding, and situationally. So today, to guide us in this important conversation, we are honored that our colleague, Dr. Mary Price, the Director of Teaching and Learning at the Forum of Education Abroad, with her extensive expertise in this field, will be sharing some insights with us on how we can move beyond the traditional intercultural frameworks to mentor our students effectively in navigating the civic dimensions of global learning. She's going to also be introducing strategies for supporting students in transforming these challenges into meaningful civic and intercultural engagement. I myself feel like a student today because I know that learning from all of you and from Mary is going to be a very thought-provoking and practical session. And so I am pleased to be here for it, and I'm pleased that you have all decided to join us for it. So thank you, Mary, for joining us. And I officially would like to welcome Dr. Mary Price to join this conversation.
Thank you so much, Jody, Kathy, and everyone. Thank you for making time. It's a busy week for everyone and a crazy time in the world that we're living in ways that I think some of us saw and others of us may thought never would happen, but we find ourselves here. Before we jump in, I just want to say that we each bring knowledge and experience to this work, and we each live in different places of our institutions and our campuses and our communities. And so we may use language differently, but I think we have some shared commitments here. And so I'm coming to this as much as a learner and someone who's in the middle of the practice, wrestling with it, struggling with questions. And so I really want to open this up from the beginning as kind of doing some framing of like some of the things that I'm sitting with. And one of my hopes for us today is that there's a chance here. I've been listening to Ta-Nehisi Coates, The Message, right now, and he talks about stories that haunt us. I'm hoping maybe some of what I surface today may haunt you, but haunt you in the way that it like sits with you and you're wrestling with it. These are some of the things that I'm wrestling with, and I think some of you may be as well. So I'll share some, I want to share some framing, share a little bit of background. We're going to play with the case example, and I have some others that you can take away. But I really see this as an opportunity where we're starting a conversation, and the conversation that it's not just one that I'm hoping continues to build in this moment, but it's others. I saw Eric Hartman is in the room here somewhere. There's a large number, there's a cross section of people who either work in equity-centered work or who work in community-based global learning and other forms of global engagement, or who work in international education or civic engagement, who are asking the same questions. And what I'm hoping is that we can really work together and build coalitions to do this work together and maybe do it a little bit more deeply and differently. And so with that note, I'm going to put on the PowerPoint because there will be PowerPoint, and I apologize, but I think it'll be helpful for some of what we're going to do today. So let me just make that happen. And as we're getting started, we're going to, if I can find it, there we go. Too many screens open. There we go, my friends. We're going to do, I'm sure everybody at this point is probably familiar with a chat storm. I really want to hear from you before I share any further. So for those of you not familiar, a chat storm is, I'm going to put a prompt up on the screen. I want you to think about it. This first one's pretty easy. Then you're going to write in the chat, and you're going to wait until I'm going to give you about a minute for everyone to respond, and then you're going to hit send. So it'll all pop up in the chat at the same time. So for the sake of us having a limited amount of time, I want you to go ahead for this first chat storm to just tell us who you are, what institution or organization you're with, where you're joining us from, however you want to interpret that, and then a word or phrase that describes how you feel about coming into this conversation today. So I'm going to give you about 1 minute. Your name, your institution, organization, where you're joining us from, and a word or phrase that describes how you feel about coming into this conversation today. – 30 more seconds. Okay, hit send. Just saw my good friend Desmond Kemp's name pass by the screen. I'm so excited. Hi, Desmond. Intrigued, just here to learn, curious to hear, interested in incorporating into the curriculum, anxious, open-minded, receptive, curious, drawn, challenged, enthusiastic. Okay, so I love these responses because I've been in rooms in the last couple of weeks, perhaps you as well, where we come into the room and the majority of the responses are, we feel under threat, we're frightened, we're distraught, we're angry. Perhaps you've been in chat rooms or on social media or in office meetings or in conversations with your family, like our students, right? But it's good to be able to come into a space, however we're feeling, including anxious, being able to name those things, but also being able to hold open a sense of curiosity, a sense of openness, because that says that there's the opportunity for hope, not only for us individually, but that we can claim and harvest that as a group. So really exciting. So welcome, everybody. And we have a wide range of institutions from across the country. Thank you so much for being here again. All right, for the second chat storm, okay, I'm going to ask you to pause again. I want you to think, write, and then I'm going to tell you to post. Tell me one interest or concern or question that drew you to this session today. You could have been anywhere, but you chose here. It's either an interest, a concern, or a question. Take another minute. About 30 seconds. All right, hit send. Kathy and Jody, if you see ones you want to read out and from the chat, please feel free to do so, or others.
Definitely. I'm seeing some, I just saw someone who said they're new to international studies or education at their university. So this is a huge learning curve. So this is an opportunity to be, assisted and supported. Someone says, yeah, interested to gather more insights on how to engage students in the global context. Someone is interested to learn from the left, the right, China, Taiwan, Jews, Muslims, red, blue. They're here for all of it. They're here for all of it. Someone else wants to be able to unpack the civic aspects of experiences, their own experience abroad as a student, and the fact that they only had the support of their family. So how they would be able to, how to better be equipped to translate that to their students.
And I appreciate the focus that some people had on rampant othering and how to understand and frame factionalism and antidotes towards it. I think that's a conversation that all of us care deeply about.
Oh, mhm.
Yeah, these are all really excellent and thoughtful comments. And so I want to kind of share like my entry point into this, and I don't claim it as being necessarily the best one, the right one. again, just coming at it from a practitioner standpoint, as well as someone who's been kind of popping in and out of different scholarly conversations and practitioner conversations over the years. For a long time, coming out of the kind of civic engaged, community engaged scholarship with a foot in the international, and then a couple years ago shifting over to the forum, where I've been getting more and more steeped in the complexities, some of which I was aware of and some of which have emerged further. And also, I'm an anthropologist by my own academic background, and so that shapes me as much as growing up in the South as a white woman, being married to a Muslim and Arab, and all the other factors of my lived experiences and yours that we're always carrying with us. So today I want us to identify where some of this is surfacing inside international education spaces and other global learning spaces, some of which maybe you're aware of, and some of which, because it might be happening on site, you might be less aware of. I want to examine that through a couple of different lenses. And so I might come at this from more of a heavier civic lens at times than others. But one of the things I want us to take away is that there are three kind of areas of practice that are actually asking a lot of the same questions. And so that's part of what I want to try to highlight today. And then help us reframe that. Like, how does the use of language like factionalism, how is that maybe a little bit different than concepts like US identity politics? Or what are the relationships between some of that? How does actually naming some of what we're seeing as factionalism, how does that open spaces? How does it create uncomfortable spaces? And so I want to talk a little bit about how that might be both an opportunity and why it might be a very, very specific challenge for us a little bit, and where I see some opportunities to go forward. Just quickly, for those of you not familiar and who are new to international education, the Forum on Education Abroad is a nonprofit membership association that we're federally recognized by the US government to be the standards development organization for the field of education abroad. So we do a lot of professional development. Our standards of good practice and our code of ethics are there to help kind of guide the field. And so I've got some resources I can share with you about that, but that's the space I'm coming with. How do we do this work more with greater quality and effectiveness? So the current moment. So things to celebrate. It is International Education Week. There has been a significant uptick in international and students pursuing global education experiences over this last year. This is wonderful. And there's even been a significant increase in study abroad participation. But I think we have to be mindful that that still only constitutes roughly about 2% of total undergraduate enrollment. And however you slice and dice the numbers, study abroad and global learning experiences of all flavors are still not readily accessible to students across institutional types. And we're talking about higher education, and we know there's a significant portion of young people never make it to any form of post-secondary education. And so we have some hard questions to ask ourselves, not just about international education, but about educational access and the role of education in society, right? So celebrate that good work is happening. We're all working really, really hard, but know that we still have quite a bit of work to do. And so I'm sitting with this, like many of you, this question around access and removing barriers. In addition to that, the Carnegie Endowment for Peace in 2023 had issued a large, significant report looking at issues of polarization and political violence in the US. But the context of that report didn't just focus on the US. It went deep inside the kind of the history and the traditions within the US, but also framed it as kind of a global phenomenon that polarization, global anxiety is on the increase in many countries around the globe. It's not just specific to the US. One thing that came out of this report, it is a long report, but if you read down in it, one of the things that stuck with me in this report was that as we see the growth of polarization, and specifically affective polarization, this sense of if I associate you with a different political party, I not only have disagreements with you, but I have an emotional affect about you that has an emotional character that I might hate you. There's something inherently about you that I hate, dislike, like I have othered you, right? At the same time, that's overlapping with facets of other parts of identity so that it's getting collapsed. So the fact that I may be Republican or a social democrat is being overlaid with the fact that maybe I'm a Black working class man or I'm a white woman from the South, right? That all of these things are being collapsed into a broader sense of kind of polarized identities that are intersectional in nature in various ways. And that further, that in addition to that, these interventions that we've talked about to kind of quell questions of polarization and disagreement are actually not effective because they're not effective based upon the evidence that was analyzed in this report, from the sense that they're too focused on the individual. They're too focused on the individual outcomes, that there's not enough addressing of kind of collective outcomes. And that stuck with me because in addition to like looking at this report, there have been others in our field who are also wrestling with these larger questions of what is higher education's role in service to the public good. So Brian Whalen and William Durden wrote a piece in this past summer, talking about that study abroad is uniquely positioned to serve the interest of democracy and supporting students in being active participants in the reproduction of democracy. There was a lot to unpack inside that article. One, for the piece that I just said for me about, well, really, who has access to education abroad? So again, a question of, well, who are we serving? And then secondly, this issue that when we look at the practice, the daily practice of what happens in study abroad, too often the practice, even though there may be research and scholarship to suggest otherwise, isn't necessarily getting us to really think about collective. How do we not only understand each other across difference, but how do we take collective action, right? And so I've been wrestling with these three things. And so some questions that it raises for me, and I'd be curious if this raises questions for you, is to what ends? So not only is it high impact practices to what ends, but global education to what ends, or civic education to what ends. And for me, that took me back to questions of what do we mean by democracy? What does it mean to educate for democracy in the US? And when education spans across national borders, how are those things related? Which values? Whose values? Who gets to decide on that? And what does it mean to do this work, this educational labor at a time of deepening factionalism and polarization? How are we as educators showing up? Not just our students, how are we as educators and administrators? And do we all agree that democracy works? And are we prepared to educate for democracy in that kind of environment? So a little bit of data to kind of share, like where at least education abroad professionals. Again, this is from data that our association collects from members of what they see as the top 10 concerns facing the field in the year ahead. This data was looking ahead for 22-23. So at that time, the top three things that you out of a score of 5, you can see on the screen ahead of you. The red arrows to me were new ads that hadn't come up before, which was the current political climate and this broader disparity between student expectations and the reality of the experience. The other thing you might see here is about adequate preparation, student access to student support service, and mental health and well-being, which we all know is a cross-cutting concern. Funding, of course, support for underrepresented students. But this notion that there's a sense of increasing anxiety, intolerance, and tensions that reflect both local and global concerns. So that brings me to our first opportunity to kind of put this in a particular context. With those kind of issues that have been, in my mind at least, and I'm suggesting, and I'm thinking that they're probably in your minds as well, I want us to consider Emma's question. So Emma's preparing to explore heritage in Hungary. She raises her hand during pre-departure orientation. You know, I've read about democratic backsliding in Hungary. Should we avoid political discussions while we're there? The orientation leader pauses before responding. You know, while we want you to be mindful of your role as guest, engaging thoughtfully with local perspectives is part of the learning experience. However, it's probably best to avoid politically charged topics, especially since you will be there a full semester. Why do you ask? Emma shifts in her seat. Well, my grandparents came from Hungary in 1921, and I want to connect with that heritage. But everything I've read makes it seem like having certain political views there is complicated. And my question to open us up is, would you be more or less likely to offer a similar response during pre-departure orientation? Why or why not? And you don't need to respond right now. What I'd like us to do right now is we're going to go to the next screen, and I'm going to invite you, after we show you how to get into Padlet, we're going to invite you, I'm actually going to ask Kathy to go ahead and put up Padlet if you would. We're going to ask you to go ahead and jump into a breakout room, discuss this, and then also post your responses in Padlet. So Kathy, could you just show and drop the link into the Padlet for folks?
Yep, the